Welcome to American National Government. In this course, you will discuss the purpose, structure, and evolution of United States government.
I'm Jordan O'Connell, History and Government Instructor at Northeast Iowa Community College. This lecture distills a decade of my written notes taken from American Government, Roots and Reform, American Government by Lenz and Holman, and our course-assigned OpenStax American Government textbook. This lecture focuses on media gatekeeping and the attention machine. The core question is this: what does a free press preserve when media gatekeeping decides what citizens see, trust, and miss? The core competency is to discuss the functions American media plays in preserving a free society.
Who decides what counts as political reality when media institutions choose what receives attention? What gets framed as crisis and what disappears before the public can react? The fight moves through editors, publishers, broadcast routines, libel rules, platform algorithms, and official attempts to punish hostile attention. Media decides what deserves scarce attention, how a conflict gets framed, which voices count as credible, which facts appear first, which stories vanish, and which errors travel faster than correction. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is the ordinary work of selection under pressure. A newspaper has limited space. A broadcast has limited minutes. A podcast has a target audience. A social media platform has an engagement system. A reporter has deadlines, editors, sources, legal risks, and competition. A citizen has limited time and limited patience. Politics moves through that machinery before it reaches public judgment. The civic problem is that Americans need a free press and distrust media at the same time. A government that can punish hard criticism will hide corruption. A media system with no public trust cannot perform its watchdog role. A citizen who believes every hostile story is fake gives officials permission to lie. A citizen who believes every viral claim becomes easy prey for manipulation. Press freedom and media literacy therefore belong together. One protects the speaker, the other disciplines the listener. Media in politics performs four core functions. It sets agendas by influencing what citizens think about. It frames issues by shaping how citizens interpret what they see. It gatekeeps by selecting, delaying, emphasizing, or excluding information. It watches power by investigating officials, agencies, corporations, campaigns, courts, police departments, and other institutions. The same institution can perform all four functions in 1 week. That is why media cannot be treated as a neutral window. It is an institution with power, incentives, legal protections, and failures. New York Times company Sullivan carries force because it turned press freedom into a working legal shield rather than a slogan. The Supreme Court protected criticism of public officials by making libel suits harder for those officials to win. That decision gave the press breathing room. It also left the public to navigate a noisy information system without asking government to become the truth police. The First Amendment protects freedom of speech and press, but the practical meaning of press freedom depends on libel law, newsroom economics, technology, and public tolerance for criticism. Before Sullivan, public officials could use libel suits to punish newspapers that made mistakes while criticizing government conduct. That risk carried force during the Civil Rights era because local officials in the South faced national criticism for police violence, segregation, and suppression of black citizens. If officials could bury newspapers under damages for minor errors, they could turn libel law into a weapon against scrutiny. New York Times Committee v. Sullivan arose from an advertisement that criticized official conduct in Montgomery, Alabama. L.B. Sullivan, a city commissioner, sued for libel, even though the ad did not name him directly. The case reached the Supreme Court, and Justice William Brennan wrote an opinion that changed American press law. The court required public officials who sue for defamation about their official conduct to prove actual malice, meaning the speaker knew the statement was false or acted with reckless disregard for truth. That standard did not make the press immune from accountability. It raised the bar because public debate about officials needs room for error, heat, and criticism. If every factual mistake and criticism of a public official creates crushing liability, cautious publishers will avoid hard stories. Officials will benefit from fear. The public will receive less information about misconduct. Sullivan therefore protects not only newspapers, but the public's ability to examine power. The source phrase actual malice sounds moral, but in law it functions as a knowledge standard. It asks what the publisher knew or recklessly ignored, not whether the official felt insulted. The alternatives carry costs. A weaker press standard might protect reputations more aggressively, but it could chill investigative reporting. A stronger press shield might protect aggressive journalism, but it could leave injured citizens with fewer remedies against falsehood. Social media complicates this balance because many speakers now publish
to large audiences without newsroom routines, fact-checking desks, legal review, or correction norms. The constitutional protection remains, but the institutional setting changed. Older media systems had gatekeepers who excluded voices, protected official narratives, and reflected class, race, gender, and regional biases. Newer media systems allow more voices to publish, document abuse, organize quickly, and challenge official accounts. They also allow lies, harassment, and propaganda to scale fast. The real issue is how information institutions select, verify, amplify, and correct claims under pressure. American media developed through distinct gatekeeping regimes. The early republic relied on party papers openly tied to factions. The penny press of the 19th century expanded circulation by lowering price and chasing urban readership. 20th century broadcasting added spectrum scarcity, Federal Communications Commission licensing, network standards, and evening news routines that gave a small number of editors unusual agenda power. Local newspapers dominated city politics through endorsements, beat reporting, and advertising contracts, while radio and television made visual urgency central to political storytelling. By the late 20th century, cable segmented audiences by tone and ideology, and digital platforms converted distribution into an engagement contest measured by clicks, shares, watch time, and ad yield. The gatekeeper changed from editor alone to a layered system of editors, producers, platform moderators, trending systems, and recommendation code. Editors and producers live inside scarcity. They decide which stories appear on the front page, at the top of a site, in a lead segment, or inside a push alert. That selection creates agenda setting. Citizens may remain free to think what they want, but media can influence what sits in front of them. A budget shutdown, police shooting, school board fight, Supreme Court argument, foreign war, corruption probe, inflation report, or celebrity scandal cannot all receive equal attention. Placement shapes attention. Repetition fixes priority. Visuals drive interpretation. The lead story tells citizens what the institution thinks demands notice. Framing operates next. The same event can appear as a crime story, civil liberties story, racial justice story, economic disruption story, national security story, public health story, or election strategy story. A protest can be framed through property damage, constitutional speech, police response, organizer demands, traffic disruption, or historical grievance. Each frame selects a doorway into the issue. A frame can illuminate. It can also narrow the public's imagination. If every policy dispute becomes a horse race story about winners and losers, citizens start evaluating politics as team competition rather than governing consequence. Reporters depend on sources, and that dependence creates another pressure. Officials leak information to shape coverage. Agencies hold briefings. Campaigns offer access. Whistleblowers provide documents. Police departments release statements. Advocacy groups supply research. Experts explain technical issues. A reporter must decide who has evidence, who has motive, and who can be quoted. Source dependence can produce accountability journalism, but it can also turn reporters into carriers of official spin. Anonymous sourcing can reveal hidden misconduct or launder factional warfare. Economic incentives push the system harder. Advertising rewards attention. Subscriptions reward loyalty and perceived value. Partisan media rewards audience identity. Nonprofit outlets depend on donors and grants. Public broadcasting depends on public funding structures and institutional trust. Platforms reward engagement, and engagement often comes from anger, fear, novelty, and confirmation. A responsible story that requires 10 minutes of concentration competes against a misleading clip that produces instant outrage. The attention market does not automatically reward accuracy. Social media moved gatekeeping from a smaller set of editors to a mixed system of platforms, users, influencers, campaigns, and algorithms. Users now distribute political information every time they share, like, repost, comment, or clip. A citizen can function as a small broadcaster without adopting the responsibilities of one. Platforms rank content through systems that consider engagement and other signals. Those systems can connect citizens to reporting they would never see, but they can also create feedback loops where citizens receive more of what keeps them watching. The watchdog role sits under all this pressure. Investigative journalists can expose corruption, police abuse, environmental harm, campaign finance schemes, agency failure, corporate misconduct, and wartime deception. Watchdog reporting requires time, documents, source protection, legal review, and editors willing to withstand pressure. It rarely works like a movie scene with one heroic reporter. It often means public record requests, database work, interviews, verification, lawsuits over access, and careful writing so the story survives legal challenge. Citizens face their own administrative burden. Media literacy is not a vibe. It is a practice. A citizen asks who produced the claim, what evidence supports it, what the frame emphasizes, what the frame hides, what incentive drives the source, whether another credible source confirms it, and whether the emotional charge is doing more work than the facts. That practice takes time, and the modern media system often punishes time. Speed is the friend of manipulation. Sullivan's central tension is that democracy needs fearless criticism of officials, but fearless criticism can include mistakes. Brennan's opinion protected what he called uninhibited, robust, and wide-open debate about public issues. That phrase carries force because it does not describe tidy civics. It describes conflict. A free society must tolerate a level of disorder in public speech because government-controlled order can protect official abuse. The source becomes sharpest in the civil rights context. Southern officials use legal tools, police power, and local influence to resist criticism. A libel judgment could do what censorship might not openly do: drain money, intimidate publishers, and warn outsiders to stay quiet. Sullivan made that tactic harder. It turned press freedom into a shield for accountability. Yet the same protection creates a modern frustration. False claims about public officials can circulate widely, especially in digital environments. Public officials face a high burden when they sue. Critics of Sullivan argue that the standard can leave reputations exposed. Defenders answer that lowering the standard would invite powerful officials to punish their critics through litigation. The trade-off is not imaginary. It sits at the center of democratic speech. Sullivan says government officials must tolerate harsh and sometimes mistaken criticism because the alternative gives officials too much power over public debate. That does not mean citizens should tolerate careless information habits. The law can protect speech that citizens should still reject as sloppy, manipulative, or false. Constitutional protection is not a civic endorsement. Media literacy, therefore, has to occupy the space between censorship and gullibility. Demanding that government remove every ugly or false claim hands dangerous authority to the state. Shrugging that every source lies surrenders the field to the worst actors. The better civic posture is disciplined skepticism, protect the legal space for criticism, then judge claims by evidence, method, and incentive. The source tension ends in a hard institutional question. If the state cannot safely serve as final referee of political truth, and if platforms and media companies have their own incentives, then citizens carry more responsibility than they may want. Press freedom gives the public access to criticism. It does not guarantee wisdom. The watchdog can bark, but the public still has to decide whether the alarm points to a burglar, a shadow, or a salesman ringing the bell. Media is an institution inside constitutional government, not background noise. Media shapes what citizens notice, how they interpret conflict, what officials fear, and which abuses become visible. It can discipline government. It can also distort attention. Its power comes from selection, repetition, framing, investigation, and distribution. The sharper audit takes one political story and identifies agenda setting, framing, gatekeeping, and watchdog function. Saying an outlet is biased and stopping there is too easy. Bias may exist, but mechanism carries more weight. What information entered the story? What stayed out? Which source received authority? Which emotional cue guided interpretation? Which public action might follow from the frame? The civic responsibility is strict because the First Amendment protects citizens from government censorship in many settings, not from their own laziness. A citizen who shares a false claim becomes part of the distribution chain. A citizen who refuses all unfavorable evidence becomes a volunteer censor inside the mind. A citizen who demands government control of political truth may solve one problem by creating a larger one. The unresolved judgment is this: how do we preserve a press strong enough to investigate power while building citizens disciplined enough not to be ruled by attention markets? A democracy that weakens the press blinds itself. A democracy that confuses virality with truth poisons its own bloodstream. The answer cannot be nostalgia, censorship, or shrugging. It has to be a harder civic practice: protect criticism, demand evidence, and know when a frame is steering you before you have chosen to be steered. The unresolved question is whether media freedom can inform self-government when attention itself becomes the scarce political resource.
If you're curious how I'm using AI to build these lectures and reshape higher education, visit thelibertytolearn.com. I'll see you in class.